On a cold Sunday morning in Moscow, Idaho, a 911 call came in that didn't sound like the start of a national obsession. It was reported as an unconscious person at an off-campus house near the University of Idaho. Within hours, the case would escape the town's boundaries and become a national fixation. By the end of that day, 4 students were dead. Within a week, millions of people who didn't know their names a few days earlier were arguing over floor plans, debating whether a crime was targeted, and treating fragments of public information like puzzle pieces that would eventually click into place. It's easy to forget, looking back, how quickly the case stopped being only a police investigation and became something else as well, a live performance of collective speculation, a tragedy that unfolded in court documents and press releases, but also in comment sections and group chats. And as the weeks went on, the internet didn't just discuss the case. It began to shape the way people experienced it. Moscow is a university town built around routine. When violence erupts in a place like that, it doesn't stay local. And in the era of constant connection, the story spreads faster than facts can stabilize. Welcome to Vanishing Threads. Today we're exploring the Moscow murders, the killings of 4 University of Idaho students in November 2022, and the way a modern homicide investigation collided with an online audience that wanted answers immediately. On the 13th of November 2022, in the early hours of the morning, 4 students were killed in a rental house off King Road in Moscow. The victims were Madison Mogan, Kaylee Gonkovs, Zana Kernodol, and Ethan Chapin. The details of exactly what happened inside that house have been described in various official and court documents, and parts of the timeline have been alleged in later filings. What is clear, even without every detail, is that the scene investigators encountered would leave a permanent scar on a small town. The house itself would become famous in a way no home ever should. Photographs of it circulated endlessly. People examined the windows, the layout, the surrounding streets. A normal residential space was turned into a symbol, then into a map, then into a kind of screen onto which millions projected certainty. That fixation wasn't accidental. True crime culture often treats space like a clue and speculation like progress, but real investigations don't run on intuition. They run on what can be proven. Later that morning, emergency services responded. In early public reporting, the incident was described as a call about an unconscious person, and police arrived to find the 4 victims deceased. The case was immediately treated as a homicide investigation. Local police were joined by Idaho State Police and the FBI, and within days, the investigation had expanded into one of the most watched criminal cases in the United States. In major investigations, facts are often scarce early on. Scenes need processing, tips need triage, and forensic work takes time. But online, that delay is often treated as evidence of secrecy. The first public phase of the case was defined by absence. There was no suspect named. There was no weapon recovered publicly. There were few concrete details that could satisfy an audience used to instant resolution. What police did provide, they provided cautiously, and when they couldn't provide it, the vacuum filled itself. In those early weeks, the word targeted was repeated again and again. Investigators used it in their public communications, but the public wanted a clean meaning. Targeted in what way? Targeted by whom? Targeted because of what? And when police could not or would not answer those questions, online audiences answered them for themselves. Targeted can mean many things in an active case, and it rarely comes with the kind of explanation the public imagines. Online, ambiguity is treated like a challenge, and the gap gets filled with certainty. This is one of the strange realities of modern true crime. People are not only consumers of information, they are producers of narratives. They don't wait for a conclusion, they build one. In the current ecosystem, the first narrative to become viral often becomes the default story, even if it is later disproven. In the days after the murders, Moscow police received a large volume of tips, and investigators began a sweeping effort to gather video and digital evidence. Cameras, doorbells, surveillance systems, and the digital trails people leave behind were treated as potential witnesses. This is where modern investigations often become both powerful and messy. In a world saturated with cameras, there is more to review than ever before, but there is also more noise. From the outside, it can look like nothing is happening, when in reality, investigators are drowning in footage, tips, and data that has to be processed carefully. As the investigation continued, one detail rose above the rest. A vehicle police believed might be significant. On the 7th of December 2022, Moscow police publicly asked for the community's help in identifying the occupant or occupants of a white Hyundai Elantra. The statement, repeated in news coverage at the time, described a white 2011 Hyundai Elantra with an unknown license plate. Investigators said they believed the occupant or occupants may have critical information to share regarding the case. That language matters. Investigators did not say the person in the vehicle was the killer. They did not say the vehicle was the murder weapon. They said they wanted to speak to the occupant or occupants because they believed those people might have information. In investigations, that distinction is everything. Online, it is often ignored. That single announcement had an immediate online effect. Social media users began searching for Elantras in their area, posting photographs of similar vehicles and analyzing any available footage. Some people approached the request responsibly, reporting sightings through official channels. Others treated it like a scavenger hunt. And once again, the internet did what it does best and worst. It accelerated attention. Acceleration sounds useful until you realize what it does to accuracy. A public request for information becomes a theory generator, and people begin treating guesswork like evidence. Even when intentions are good, help can become harassment, and investigators are left sorting signal from noise. While all of that happened online, investigators continued to work in the background, assembling their case through standard methods: forensics, interviews, digital analysis, and the slow work of narrowing possibilities. That process is also where misconceptions about digital evidence show up. People imagine that phones and cameras function like perfect witnesses. They do not. Video can be unclear, data can be incomplete, location estimates can be imprecise. Investigators use these tools because they are useful, not because they are magical. On the 30th of December 2022, authorities arrested Bryan Kohberger in Pennsylvania in connection with the Moscow murders. In the days after the arrest, more information entered the public sphere, including the release of a probable cause affidavit that outlined, according to investigators, how they linked Kohberger to the case. This is a crucial distinction for any responsible retelling. Affidavits describe what investigators allege and what they believed was sufficient to justify an arrest. They are not verdicts. According to court documents, investigators described a combination of evidence types, including surveillance footage analysis, mobile phone data analysis, and DNA-related allegations. Parts of the affidavit discuss a vehicle investigators refer to as a suspect vehicle, and the way they used various sources to identify a person they believed was connected to that vehicle. The affidavit also describes an alleged sequence of events in the early hours of 13th November. Affidavits also have a particular shape. They summarize evidence to support probable cause, not to settle every argument. But online, technical terms get translated into certainty, and an allegation starts being treated like a verdict. At the same time, the online environment around the case became harsher. People argued about evidence that hadn't been tested in open court. People tried to identify anyone remotely connected to the victims. Some turned the victims into characters, reducing complex lives into a set of social media photographs and rumors. That reduction is one of the quiet cruelties of viral crime coverage. Victims become the pretty one, the smart one, the boyfriend, the roommate. They become symbols instead of people. The internet asks what they posted, where they went, who they talked to, and then frames those ordinary details as if they are part of a script. And for the families, that can become a second trauma. They are forced to watch strangers debate their loved ones' lives, sometimes with contempt, sometimes with obsessive familiarity, and often with complete confidence built on incomplete information. A case like this becomes a mirror for a larger cultural problem: the way tragedy is processed as content. To be clear, public interest in high-profile crimes is not new. but the infrastructure of that interest has changed. In earlier decades, people watched a press conference on television and read a newspaper the next day. In 2022, they watched police updates clipped into TikTok videos, reacted in real time, and joined group chats where the line between verified information and imaginative reconstruction was never stable. In the Moscow case, that instability was visible from the start. Platforms reward certainty and escalation, and the most compelling story often outruns the most accurate one. And that is the most dangerous thing about speculative online sleuthing. It turns not knowing into a failure that must be corrected immediately. A homicide investigation, however, does not move at the speed of public appetite. It moves at the speed of evidence, procedure, and law. In May 2023, prosecutors obtained an indictment through a grand jury, and later that month, Kohberger entered not guilty pleas in court. Those are procedural milestones, but they also mattered culturally because they extended the timeline. For audiences who wanted an ending, the case did not offer one. Instead, it shifted into the long, slow machinery of the justice system. Court systems are slow by design, and while that can be frustrating, speed is how errors happen. In an ongoing case, silence becomes a vacuum, and the vacuum gets filled. But not all online attention is equally harmful. There is a version of public interest that is careful, reading official documents, following reputable reporting, remembering that victims are not plot devices, and that suspects are not guilty until proven. There is also a version of it that is reckless. The Moscow murders sat directly at the crossroads of those two versions. If you're going to follow a case like this, the responsible approach is simple in theory and difficult in practice. Track dates, quote sources, use cautious language, avoid naming uninvolved people, treat court documents as allegations, not conclusions. And remember that I saw it on TikTok is not a source. One reason the case drew such intense attention is that it happened in a setting people associate with safety, student housing, a small town, an ordinary weekend. In the United States, university life is often portrayed as a transitional bubble, a space where adulthood arrives gently. The murders shattered that idea, and when an assumption breaks, people search for a story that will rebuild it. That story often takes the form of how it could have been prevented, or what the victims did wrong, or what warning signs were missed. But those are often stories told for comfort, not truth. They imply that tragedy only happens when rules are broken, and that if you follow the right rules, you are safe. The reality is more unsettling. Sometimes there is no rule that would have saved you. In this case, many details remained unknown or contested in public discussion, and the responsible approach is to focus on what can be verified. 4 students were killed. The investigation drew on extensive resources. Police publicly requested information about a white Hyundai Elantra in early December 2022. A suspect was arrested on 30th of December 2022. The court process moved forward through 2023 with indictments and pleas reported. Even those anchors are enough to tell a story, because the story here isn't only who did it. It's what happens when a case becomes a global conversation before a court has a chance to do its work. It's the transformation of grief into content, and the transformation of uncertainty into suspicion. It's also a reminder of something uncomfortable. The internet is very good at feeling involved. Feeling involved is not the same thing as being helpful. Everything beyond that, the precise sequence, motive, certain evidence interpretations, belongs to the court process. It must be handled as allegations until proven. That doesn't mean you can't analyze the broader implications. In fact, this case is particularly valuable as a study in how modern digital life changes crime and the public's relationship to it. First, there is the question of how evidence is gathered. Investigators now work in a world where location histories, phone records, and surveillance cameras create massive datasets. That can make cases solvable that once would have gone cold. But it also introduces vulnerabilities, misinterpretation of data, public misunderstanding of what data can prove, and the temptation to treat digital traces as omniscient. Second, there is the question of how information is distributed. When police release a single detail, like a vehicle description, it becomes a mimetic object online. People repeat it, remix it, and attach it to narratives. The detail becomes bigger than the context that produced it. Third, there is the question of ethics. True crime content is not inherently unethical. It can be investigative, educational, and even justice-oriented. But the Moscow murders demonstrated how quickly a tragedy can be turned into entertainment, and how quickly that entertainment can bleed into harassment. There is a reason some court documents have referenced concerns about witnesses being subjected to threats and harassment. In the modern era, those are not abstract risks. They are predictable outcomes of viral attention. This doesn't only apply to this case, it's a pattern. Once a story becomes big, every person around it becomes searchable. A neighbor becomes a suspect, a classmate becomes a witness, a family member becomes a content source, and platforms make it effortless to cross that line from curiosity into intrusion. As of early 2026, the Moscow case remains part of an ongoing legal process. The public will eventually learn more through trial proceedings if and when those details become public. Until then, the most responsible approach is to resist the illusion that you can solve an active case from a distance. The internet can be remarkably good at noticing patterns. It can also be catastrophically bad at restraint. The Moscow murders are, at their core, a story about 4 young lives cut short. But they are also a story about a culture that struggles to sit with uncertainty, and about platforms built to reward answers whether they are true or not. If you take one thing from this episode, let it be this: you can care without consuming. You can be curious without declaring certainty. You can follow a case without treating it like a puzzle box designed for your entertainment. And you can refuse to participate in the part of the internet that turns tragedy into a game. If you were watching the case unfold in late 2022, you may remember how it felt. The constant refresh, the sense that a clue could appear at any moment, the belief that enough collective attention could force a truth into the open. But truth is not a performance, it is a process. And in the end, it will not be determined by the loudest theory online, but by evidence tested in court. If you've followed this case, what do you think the Moscow murders reveal about internet sleuthing? Does public attention help investigations, or does it create a new kind of damage? And where do you draw the line between curiosity and intrusion? If you found this episode interesting, consider giving us a like or subscribing for more deep dives into digital mysteries and true crime shaped by the online world. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, stay curious, stay safe.